Hi, everyone. It is July 9th, and this is our session on shame and guilt in eating disorder recovery. It's a long hour tonight. We have a lot to cover, and I know it's summer, so our participation is almost non-existent, but I'm going to go on with the show anyway because I know I'm going to send this out to you all and you will all benefit from it. So here we go. I put a lot of work into it and I think you'll learn a lot about how the human brain is really being hijacked in an eating disorder and how malnutrition definitely makes this situation even worse. But I think we all know how malnutrition plays a role in the brain's functioning or non-functioning. So we're really going to focus tonight on actually just how the brain works and how we can help rewire it. So the very first thing we're going to do is I'm going to welcome everybody and explain why it matters to understand the difference between shame and guilt and how they're powerful. Both of them are powerful emotional states that really fuel eating disorders rather than help in recovery, and how we can help, like I said earlier, um, rewire the brain so that we could assist in recovery from almost like a non-emotional point of view, but really from an intellectual point of view. So the difference between shame and guilt, to make it easy, is to say that guilt is something that you might have done bad, and shame is I am bad. So guilt is really about the behavior, while shame is about owning it within your identity. And both are really common in recovery, um, but they lead to very different emotional outcomes. So I'm starting off the session tonight with a challenge question. And one of those challenge questions is, which one do you relate to more in your recovery, shame or guilt? And these two emotions, they're super hurtful, and they really both can give you the feeling that you are unworthy and make you feel like you should just disappear. They make you feel that other people are perceiving you differently than you should be. So, as we go through this, I'm going to explain where shame comes from and also where guilt comes from. So, shame comes from childhood experiences, things like being criticized all the time. It doesn't even have to be all the time, it could be trauma or really just feeling misunderstood. Um, Social stigma around mental illness, body image, food, thoughts about maybe ruining your family, like you're a perceived burden, even religious or moral beliefs that get twisted into self-punishment. And again, shame just keeps eroding our self-worth. And as Brene Brown says, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes that we are even capable of change. So think about where you feel most shame from. Within the eating disorder recovery context, I actually wrote down a few, and a few would be about your body, about your food choices, like we said, not being able to eat, people telling you just to get over it, shame for just needing help in general, not getting better fast enough, keep relapsing, and this constant thought that you are taking people's money, you're hurting the people that you love. So, even the most supportive families, even within the most supportive families, you could have this repetitive thought that you're still a burden to your family. And, excuse me, and everyone would just be better off without me. So, that breeding ground that goes on and on is that feeding ground for relapse on a constant basis. The brain plays such an incredible role, And this is really the crux of my discussion today, the neurobiology of shame and guilt. Because I know that we all could understand shame and guilt. We've been feeling it for a very long time, but I really think it's important to understand like where shame and guilt comes from. So first I'm going to read through these slides a little bit, and then I am going to really get into the parts of the brain that are activated. And I'm sure there are many more parts of the brain that are activated, but for this program alone, we're just going to focus on some of them. So the very first one is shame activates what's called the DMN, which is the default mode network, and the insula. And these are both part of the self-evaluation pain and disconnecting part where the brain will go into disconnection. Chronic shame could increase cortisol levels, fuel emotional dysregulation, and activate your fight or flight response. This leads to avoidance behaviors like restriction, binging, purging, isolating, just to cope. Dopamine circuits then also can come into play via shame, anxiety, behavior to numb or regain control. Then you find temporary relief, and then guilt and repeat. So these are the parts that get triggered. The insula, the amygdala, there's an increase in cortisol, and definitely your fight and flight response. There, even the dopamine reward system, like you could see here on the slide, gets activated. So here's how your brain stores shame. This is just a very clear-cut um, grid of how the brain will store shame, but I'm going to go into a few of them. The first one is the amygdala, and this is the one that detects emotional threats. It sounds alarms. It tells the brain and it tells the body that there's major danger. The DMN, the default mode network, this is the place where people will say all the time, like, my brain just doesn't shut off. Like that negative self-talk just goes around and around and around all day long. It's screaming at me. The insula creates the physical symptoms like the nausea, the tight chest, the frozen feeling. The insula, and I'm going to go over where the insula and the amygdala later, um, they're sort of like they work together. They're like, kissing cousins. Then there's the hippocampus. And this is where those emotional memories are stored. And this is where that horrible shame gets remembered as part of your life story. The dopamine system, the dopamine system reinforces these eating disorder behaviors, and that gives you short-term relief from shame. And I'll explain that to you later as well. The stress system, which is the HPA axis, this is the part that activates the fight or flight or freeze mode when shame is triggered. So shame is hardwired in the brain for survival purposes. We all think, and I usually say in session to people, like, oh, if Hashem had an email system, I would write, like, why would the brain want to do this to us? It's so torturous that it makes all of these places in the brain get activated, and we just remember them and remember them. And then when I did a lot of research, it really occurred to me that the brain does this because we were really hardwired back in our ancestry. This is all hardwiring for survival. And a piece of that survival was connection for safety. So the brain needed to sort of create a place where you didn't want to feel rejected or unworthy by your caregivers, even if it was unintentional, because by a normal thinking process knows that most human beings cannot survive alone. So you have to be part of a family or a group or a support system. So if a person gets isolated by themselves, usually to sustain life becomes life threatening. The limbic system, which is where the amygdala is, and if we go back, that amygdala is the place in the brain that tells the body that there's a really big danger. It stores the emotional memories as well. And once the brain learns these memories, it's hard to disconnect. And then the brain will internalize it like its true belief system. So the shame is sort of like, to be loved, I must hide this part of me. It becomes like a protective reflex and a, a way to avoid future rejection. So, excuse me, how do we get out of this DMN, this default mode network? And remember, this default mode network, if we go back up to our grid, is where that negative self-talk happens over and over and over again. So to get out of the default mode network, you have to do the opposite. And what does that opposite look like? The opposite looks like task positive network. And this is the place which lights up when you're focused, curious, and engaged. So, what are some of the tools that we use to activate the TPN, as we call it? One is we activate it through mindful movement. Walking, yoga, even folding laundry will activate this part of the brain that, once again, we call the task positive network. Why? Because we're doing tasks. It's more, I would say, about distraction. And things even that require like coloring or knitting or puzzles, etc., even music, things that you're doing physically with your hands versus being in your head. You can even do naming sensory experiences, like I hear something, I smell something, I see something. Today, I actually had a girl who I was working with in meal coaching, and she was trying a new food that was really activating that fear threat. And what we were doing is we were actually counting backwards from 100, skipping over number eights and number twos. And I watched her as she started the sandwich. I actually had to prompt her. But once she started using that negative, that countdown from 100, focusing more on not doing eights and twos, I was watching her actually eat the sandwich way more freely without any prompting. So I know even in session we do like breathing exercises because that could actually reduce the default network as well. So remember, when the default mode network says you are your thoughts, the task network says you just have thoughts, but you are way more than your thoughts. You could also do what's called train your brain with mindfulness. Mindfulness is one of the most evidence-based ways for the default mode network to deactivate a little bit. Studies show that even for a short, regular period of mindfulness practices, this repetition in our brain can actually be calmed down. So, what does that look like? So, people who try at least a 10-minute guided meditation a day, and there are definitely some apps on our phones. You can download them to an MP3 player. Someone has access to other apps or YouTube. You can actually perform something called a body scan. And again, that would be really a little bit too difficult to go over right now, but it's starting from your head to your toes, and noticing any place in your body that is holding tension. And then called noticing a thought. It's called noting. And when you notice a thought, you label it. You could actually say it out loud, and then you see if you could just let it pass. You could actually again realize that and say to yourself, this is not me, this is just a thought. And over time, what we're doing is we're telling and teaching our brain that you don't have to believe in everything that you think. So if you want, you can take a second just to like sort of maybe think of a place in your body right now that you are noticing some tension. Try to let it go. Or you're having a thought in your head, and you could try to actually pretend almost like that thought is a leaf, and it's your thought is written on that leaf, and you're watching it blow away in the wind and letting it be released from your mind. The default mode network likes to recycle the old narrative, and also to reduce it, you need to introduce new ones and repeat them as often as possible. So, one of the things that's interesting is that I notice sometimes when I am in session, I do repeat myself a lot. And sometimes I explain myself to my clients that I repeat myself not because I want to be repetitious and sound boring, but you repeat yourself because I know my messaging is more on the task positive modality network versus the default mode. And the more that my clients come to sessions, the more they stick to recovery, the more that they practice their own positive messaging and challenge the negative ones, or remind themselves that they are not their thoughts, that they will continue to change the wiring in their brain. This is called the rewiring phrase. And it's where you're learning to be a lot kinder to yourself, even if you mess up. This, you could say to yourself, this thought is very familiar, but this thought is not the truth. I'm just a work in progress. And every time you choose to have a compassionate thought, even if you don't believe in this compassionate thought, believe it or not, your brain is not smart enough to know that the thought is just being said. It actually still weakens the old loop from the insula that's trying to, I mean, the default mode network that's trying to replay this over and over and over again. Another thing that we work on a lot is the default mode network loves, loves, loves to connect to others, to break. I mean, it loves loneliness. And in order to break it, it's super important that we connect to others. And one thing that we know about shame is that it thrives when you're alone in your thoughts. And even when you talk to your therapist, or you talk to the dietitian, or you talk in a support group, even to a trusted person, it actually short circuits the shame loop. So every time, like, you'll text a friend, you'll sit near someone while doing something small, or actually just call someone who a sibling who you could just say, can you just listen to me for a few minutes, can interrupt the default mode network and actually start creating a safer network to the brain. So there are therapeutic targets that will, there are therapeutic tools that will target the default mode network. And these obviously are not things that we do in the nutrition office, but these things are definitely out there if you're not doing them already, or you haven't tried them, to stop. uh, One of the things that we're looking to do, and I not sure if we will be able to get to this tonight, but one of the things that we will do is the amygdala and the insula, which are in the center part of the brain. They're actually like that kissing cousins that definitely one tells us that the body is sort of like not feeling right, and the other one decides whether or not what's not feeling right is dangerous and threatening to us. And some of these tools that target DMN is EMDR, internal family systems therapy, meditative movement therapies, and psychedelic assisted therapies. So, again, if anyone wants to know any of those therapies, I'm sure you've heard of them all, but if anyone wants to know of any of these, you can definitely, or we could definitely talk about them privately, or you can email me. The default mode network wants to protect you by preparing you, warning you, and making sense of the past, but it does get stuck. That's the combination, the default mode network, the insula, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the HPA axis. All of these places in your brain are there to protect you. But remember, when the default mode network gets activated, it will go around in that loop. So you might never get it to shut off forever, and you shouldn't because that's not how we were designed, because it definitely is a survival tool for the body. But you can teach it new ways to operate so that you don't have to walk around with such a high level of shame. It will give you more space in your brain to live your life, and your brain will overall, which is like what we want to do. We want to teach the brain that it doesn't always have to be so hyperactivated, the insula and the amygdala in the brain, that it's not always under threat. So we're going to get in a little bit just to all of the parts of the brain, because I love when my clients or the loved ones who listen to this get to understand that this is not something anyone is making up, that these parts of the brain actually do these horrible things, not on purpose. Again, these parts of the brain were designed for survival and connection to the world. And when our environment, our upbringing, our childhood, all of these, the people who we surround ourselves with, when they make us feel a certain way, and the insula and amygdala view it as harmful, they will come in to survive. They will go into survival mode. It doesn't know that you're, a modern human being, and some of these things are not really life threatening. That's just not how we were designed. So the insula is the brain's hub for what's called interoception. And this is your internal sense where your body and emotions come together. So when you feel shame and it hits you in your chest or your gut or your face or your throat, okay, the anterior, the insula gets activated. And many people will say to me, you don't understand, my throat gets really tight, like I can't even swallow, the food won't even go down, or my chest is really tight. And usually that is the insula waking up to tell the body that there's a threat. So it gets activated, and then it could cause some nausea, it can cause dizziness, it could, actually, this pressure in our chest is probably one of the number one reasons why women go to the emergency room thinking that they're having a heart attack, when it's really not. It's a hyperactivated insula and amygdala that's creating this pressure in their chest. Um, but this shame that just starts out in the head actually gives it what's called a visceral quality. A visceral meaning a body quality. So you don't just think you're bad, you feel bad in your bones, which is something that my clients will also say to me. It's like, you don't understand what I'm feeling. Like, I feel it everywhere. It's not just in my head. And the thought of shame, it's not just the thought, it goes throughout my whole body. That it's experiencing the whole thing. So it's very hard for people to think that whatever their thought is isn't real. Moving into what another part of the brain, and they're all really, all these parts of the brain are in the center of the brain. And this one is the memory encoding in the hippocampus. And any of these shameful experiences, especially the ones in childhood or adolescence, are stored here. And this means that the event may not even be consciously remembered in detail, but this emotional residue remains there. And the hippocampus works with the amygdala to make these emotions like really, really significant. So one of the examples would be that someone made a comment about your weight at 9 years old, and even at 30 years old, even if you really don't care about it that much anymore, your brain holds on to the memory of how you felt when you were anxious or you were insulted at 9. Being ignored or invalidated as a teen may resurface as an unworthy adult when you're trying to recover, and it may come up thinking like you don't deserve support because you were ignored and invalidated. And these are the memories that are stored in the hippocampus. So what happens is that the brain says, well, if I never feel this way again, I'll be safe. So let me just avoid the things that scare me. And the avoidance leads to, for my clients, like maybe lack of food or isolation. And then as we engage in this avoidance and isolation, but we feel safe, we reinforce that we sort of are unworthy because being by ourselves or starving gives us that safety. The cortisol, chronic stress, and shame loops. So, what happens here is that when the other areas become activated, cortisol then triggers your stress hormones. And what it does is cortisol levels, sorry, that's my dog, cortisol levels will rise, and then the body goes into fight or flight or freeze, or they say fawn. This stress loop becomes like very habitual. So it looks like this: you feel shame, then your body activates the stress response, you engage in restricting or isolating, you get the relief, and then you feel even more shame, when you do the maladaptive behavior. So what happens is that when this happens on a chronic level, okay, not in an acute one time, but when it happens day in, day out, day in, day out, then other areas and other hormones start getting dysregulated, like our memory or our sleep, our digestive system, our mood. And then what happens is that we go back to the place where then it can get locked in again by the default mode network, and that's going to like sort of like lock in that place that helps it go on that loop. Shame also deregulates dopamine, and I know we had a whole session on dopamine. But remember, dopamine's the reward system. So what tends to happen is, and I think this makes sense. What tends to happen here is that when you use the eating disorder behavior, like restricting, binging, purging, to cope with the shame, you get a release of dopamine. Why? Because you're actually putting the body back into a little bit of safety. It's happy. It feels rewarded when you activated that. Now your body feels relief from or distracted or numb, but you have to remember this, that this relief is short-lived. Then you get followed by guilt and shame, very, very similar to the cortisol chronic stress loop. The dopamine dysregulation loop will also act like this as well. Attachment and mirror neurons. So the brain also stores shame relationally. In early life, caregivers give back love and validation. This is what should happen. And the child then says, I am worthy. My mother hugs and kisses me. My mother compliments me. We have a loving family. My aunt comes in and gives me a kiss. My father tells me whatever I did in school was wonderful for the most part. Or there's a balance between raising a child and, disciplining them, but also balancing it with like a lot of love and attention and a lot of validation. But what happens when your caregiver, okay, they actually are they mirror shame or even they withdraw or um they criticize. How about even themselves, or you watch your parents criticize each other, or they get criticized, or they watch a sibling get criticized or shamed. So what the child begins to think is that they associate having an emotion, right? Because if they say something, do something, instead of being validated, they get criticized. They begin to associate their emotions with danger. So over time, what happens is that they self-shame, they self-silence, they self-attack, and they believe that the more they shut down or the more that they don't need to exist, it will keep them safe and lovable. And this becomes pretty dangerous. So, how does shame actually sustain the eating disorder cycle? I think we like covered that a little bit before, but just to repeat, shame actually is greater than stronger than the eating disorder behavior. The eating disorder behavior then creates this strong level of temporary relief. This strong level of temporary relief will ultimately lead to more shame. So, in an example, restricting will give you a false sense of control or purity, but it reinforces I'm only good if I suffer. Guilt after eating equals punishment urges. Isolation equals loss of connection, which equals more shame. So if you look to the right on this slide, you'll see that there's a cycle of psychological, it's just like psychological addiction. If you look this um, on this slide, you'll see that you start out with emotional pain. There's a craving, a big craving for relief. Then we look for a behavior to find that relief. And then we find short-term relief only to be followed up by a negative consequence from the behavior, which then leads to lower self-esteem and more pain, which leads to depression, guilt, and shame, which leads to more emotional pain and then more craving for relief. So again, what are some common shame-based thoughts? And some are more like, I'm a burden. I don't deserve to be here. I'm selfish for needing this help. I should be better by now. My family, people would be better off without me. And everyone has their own shame story. Nobody would love me if everyone really knew this about me. I would be such an embarrassment to my family. I know for many of my clients, the internal messages will be I would be responsible for my kid not getting married. I may be responsible for what else would we be responsible for? My family fighting a lot, my parents' financial distress. I'm responsible for being, or not responsible, but I'm shameful for being the sick person in my family. So these are the internal messages that create shame. And the story would be like, again, which is your story? So, how do we break the shame cycle? So, one of the best ways to do it is definitely become aware of it, right? So, when it shows up for you, you have to actually be aware of it and label it. Okay, you can even say it out loud. You can say, this is not me. This is a thought I'm having. This, the shame is speaking. My shame is speaking. The compassionate part of it would say is, of course I feel like this. I'm in that negative loop. My insula, my amygdala, my cortisol, my dopamine, they're all acting this way due to my upbringing. This is its avenue that it found for me to create this shame cycle. It's really not me. My brain's in survival mode. This showed me as a kid or now that if I um, didn't have this loop going on, I would be rejected. I'm trying to survive, but I really still am worthy of care. Again, we go into connection as talking to someone because we know that shame thrives in silence. Reframe some of the thoughts that you're not exhausting your loved ones, not you exactly, but your illness is. Okay, and it wouldn't matter. Sadly enough, I've had friends with kids with cancer. I've had friends with kids with type 1 diabetes. I've had friends with kids with Crohn's disease. And regardless of whatever the illnesses cost my own brother-in-law for 8 years battled cancer. And we all had to pitch in financially. We had to pitch in with our time. I was traveling back and forth to Georgia, living with him and helping them out. Um, and again, no one would say that anyone else's illness is exhausting them. We all know all illnesses are exhausting. So again, you're not exhausting. My brother-in-law wasn't exhausting me. The illness itself was exhausting to everybody, and sadly enough, most exhausting to him. So here's like a loving point. Like shame heals through empathy, not through punishment. So anytime that we decide that we are going to punish ourselves for feeling shame, okay, we're actually helping the eating disorder thrive instead of helping rewire our brain with compassion. So Here we go again. We want to track it. Sometimes maybe use a journal to write down what some of these feelings of shame or guilt are. And we want to name it. And we want to actually not run away from it, but we want to actually do small exposures, like deep breathing, going for a walk with it, and actually seeing if we can tolerate it while we are actually showing ourselves compassion and trying to down regulate the insula and the amygdala from treating this as like this intense danger, which then stimulates again the stress system in our body, which keeps us nervous and shaky, which then, of course, makes us feel horrible. Um, so some people actually write a letter to their younger child self when they knew that they were getting they were hearing these messages when everything first started, and they knew that if daddy yelled at mommy and mommy just slammed the door and went to her room and he would scream, I don't want to hear anything, or I'm not talking to anyone, or he would, there was a highly volatile home where you just learn not to speak and you just learn to disappear. Maybe you just want to write a letter to yourself, basically saying, like, I really understand where some of this shame comes from or where it started. You also want to use things like and statements, right? Not or. You don't want to say, anything with an or. So it's like, I feel ashamed and I'm trying my best, or I am worthy. I feel like a burden and I know my family wants me alive and well. It's not like I feel ashamed, therefore I'm a loser. You know, it's really an and the and is always more of an uplifting, positive statement. So exploring the impact on loved ones. Well, yeah. So there's guilt that often stems from believing you're hurting your family. The reality is your loved ones want you well. The illness wants to keep you stuck, but your family really wants you well. And remember that healing from this allows for repair, reconnection, and rewriting your role in everyone's life, right? So again, if you keep the narrative going that you're hurting your family and you stay in that shame and guilt mode, right? It's really going to keep you stuck. If you tell yourself that you're allowed to heal and you're allowed to reconnect some of these wirings with compassion and you're allowed to rewrite your narrative so that you can do better in your role, then you're going to see that over time you will do better in your role. So again, I think we covered like isolation versus reconnection, and isolation feeds into shame, while recovery, if you choose connection, even when you don't feel you deserve it, you can know that if you show up, this is really like an act of courage. So the challenge question could be is what's one way you can stay connected every day? Just one way, even if it feels uncomfortable. Like you have to try to do one thing and make it something that isn't so easy. Like if you always call your sister, I think that's great, but maybe you want to try one day to call a friend you haven't spoken to in a week or two. One that you almost had that like weird feeling of like you're not in the mood to speak to her today because you're just feeling so awful and so shameful. Um, but call her anyway and see, call her today anyway and see if you can connect with her, and I bet you when you get off the phone, you're actually going to feel better. So, one of the next slides is from shame to worthiness, and realize that you are not your eating disorder. You are not the shame you carry. And recovery is about proving you're good enough. It's about reclaiming the belief that you already it's about reclaiming the belief that you already are good enough, not that you have to work on being good enough, is that you already are good enough just the way you are. And then another challenge question that I will ask everybody to do at home is to write down what would it feel like it to believe today that you're worthy without even having to earn it. So wherever you are in your recovery, you're still worthy. You're still a loving person, and that your shame and your eating disorder has nothing to do with your worthiness. So some of the takeaway thoughts is shame and guilt are human. We are definitely all designed to have them. They don't really make you broken. They're a part of our survival mechanism. Sometimes they do hijack us, that's true. And they do fall into that locked in place, that loop, and it definitely can drive us crazy. Um, but again, the answer really isn't perfection. It's looking at these thoughts with compassion, curiosity, and courage. So, I know most of the thoughts and I know most of the belief systems that the people I work with suffer with. And I think they definitely fall into the compassion, like be curious why that thought exists and have the courage to challenge it. It's not about being perfect. Again, it's just about being in the moment with that thought, but really realizing that it's part of how your brain is helping you survive. And recovery means facing these feelings and walking through them and not around them. And most of the people who will listen to this, they're all amazing. And everyone I know who's part of the Brave, Bold, and Nourished program, um, why are they part? They're part because they're super active in their recovery, and they're already, this is just a little dab of most of the stuff that they already know. So again, what are some of the challenge questions? It's where does your shame show up most in your recovery? How do you think guilt helps or hurts you? And who do you usually share this with, or how do you usually get it out of you? Um, so these are some of those questions. I wanted um, just before we go, is I wanted to show one more slide, but I couldn't get this slide on the PowerPoint. So I wanted just to show it to everybody um, in just on a different part of the screen. And I wanted to add here with the malnutrition piece. And again, the two parts of the brain that I believe are really, really annoying, although they're definitely what we need for survival. But yet in the area of eating disorders, there's a lot of work to be done on these two areas because I do believe that they really contribute to most of the eating disorder, you know, problem you want to say, or symptomology. That would be better. So in malnutrition, well, let me start here. The insula, just to compare the two, because when I was doing this research, it was confusing a little bit between the insula and the amygdala in the brain. They're both in the center part of the brain. And so I'm like, you know what? I want to make a diagram of them so I could see them sort of side by side. And I have handouts. I'm going to send some handouts, and you'll also see an email next week. Just for the Brave, Bold, and Nourished members, they'll be receiving a nice, really email that sort of like tidies up a lot of this PowerPoint presentation tonight. But so the insula is really the part of the brain that detects body signals, right? And it detects emotional awareness like shame and disgust. And it detects body awareness like I feel tightness in my chest. Interoception is I feel like my stomach is bloated and I feel the food stuck in my throat. And this is gross. And I feel full. So I feel fat. The amygdala is the part of the brain that actually is the part that says, "Oh, you feel these things? Oh my God, is that a threat? Should we panic over this? Should we like run? What should we do? What do we do about this thing? What do we do? I don't know what to do. This is like, are we going to die? Are we going to survive? Like, what should we do? Oh my God, if you feel fat, if you feel this way, like we're just not going to eat. We're just not going to eat. There's danger here. Don't eat. Don't eat. So the insular is really the part that feels it, where the amygdala decides if it's like a life threatening danger. And they work together really in the fact that, like, when someone is malnourished, which actually adds a third layer of damage, it means that you get what's called a hyper you get the insula becomes hyper. And when that happens, plus malnutrition, you get all distortion of hunger and fullness cues. You get panic around every bodily signal there is, and the emotional numbness heightens. The amygdala, when you're malnourished, constantly stays in a state of anxiety. It gets an exaggerated fear of food that it's dangerous and life threatening. And there's an overreaction to stress. So, malnutrition just doesn't starve your body, it starves your brain's ability to feel safe by hyper magnifying, turning on these two areas of the brain on, like, oh, putting them in severe overdrive. So it's sort of like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is the malnutrition, because the body naturally views malnutrition as a dangerous threat. The amygdala will say it's a dangerous threat because it is, and then the insula will start acting up, and then creating a heightened sense of um, uh, lack of perception or interoception about our body signals, and emotional awareness claiming them as shame and disgusting. And I don't know, I just think it like constantly goes in circles. So one of the things that my research said is, in order to even know where the insula and the amygdala are doing damage just on their own, is nutrition has to be, your weight restoration and malnutrition have to be solved before someone can know what the baseline is of your hyper action on the insular and amygdala level, because it will become like really unknown while the malnutrition of your body still exists. So again, because of the lack of participation tonight, I have one call in, so thank you. But I will be sending this out, so we're going to end a few minutes early because I don't believe there will be questions. But again, feel free to email me to iris@nicrd.com for any questions. And you could always go on the website, www.nicrd.com, under the blog section, as there are at least 25 articles on eating disorders and all different tips and strategies. I will also in the future be, if you have access, within your firewalls, etc., to what's called a virtual chat box. I'm not sure it will be as good as answering questions as me, but I'm training it right now to be able to answer questions. Um, when somebody needs immediate help and they can't be in touch with me. So I'm training it in my own words, etc. To a certain degree, it's your own words, and the others like virtual AI. But yeah, so hopefully that will be in the near future. And I look forward to having a guest speaker at the end of August. So I'm really excited about that. And I will be sharing that through emails. And we will obviously be having an August meeting. Not quite sure what topic I'll be doing. If anyone has any suggestions, please email me again at iris@nicrd.com. And I think that's about it. You should be getting the emails um, by early next week for summing up this meeting. And that's it. So have a great night. And thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.